Welcome to Conversations with the Authors.
Welcome back to Conversations with the Authors. I'm your host, Daniel.
I'm Daryl.
I'm Sandra.
And I'd like to thank you all for pressing the play button. And thank you, Alexander Nakarada, for the intro, as always. Today we're going to talk about writing like a child. And in this I mean sort of the personalities that we sort of draw upon to create our fantastic world. Daryl and Sandra, you have created a fantastic world filled with fantastic characters and called Oddlings. Mm-hmm. Of course, our main character, Nicholas, and his band of brothers, so to speak. So I guess the first question would be defining what creating like a child means in the context of writing. So how would you...
Well, I'll tell you what it means to me. Number one, it doesn't mean writing with crayons, no, right. And it doesn't mean that writing something that's not cohesive and imaginative. It actually means that to be imaginative. Mm-hmm. I see it as a metaphorical thing, to be able to write like a child and not let the adult filter stop you from imagining. I have a friend who was very inventive when we were kids, when I was 10 years old. And he became, later in life, he became a doctor too. But he still had a lot of imagination. And I was somewhat just enamored by that he could still come up with these fun ideas about things.
Yes. So, Sandy, writing like a child means what to you?
Treating my entire environment that I look at like toys.
Mm-hmm.
So I like to play with it.
Mm-hmm.
I like to play with the environments. Mm-hmm. I like to play with, when I look at them, like one of the stories, not to give anything away, has a bunch of oddlings that are microscopic or can barely be seen, and they turn into human-sized, human-like creatures. And I got that from a pickle jar of buttons.
Mm-hmm.
And when you shake the pickle jar of buttons, you get different combinations of buttons in different places, and if you dump them out on the floor, it looks like a creature, or it makes a picture, or makes a tornado.
Well, you know what? My wife, like children, has what we call pareidolia.
Mm-hmm.
And pareidolia is when you look at something,
you
see pictures in clouds, you see them in shapes, and she'll look at a cloud, you see the elephant over there, or she'll look at some structure that's formation that's happened in a tree trunk. So it looks like a face,
which is not abnormal.
Yeah, it's not.
Our brains.
We all do that.
Our brains are wired to look for
but
patterns.
I think some of us are more in tune to it than others.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like when just before we went out to run errands, and I went in the bathroom, and Zoe had little tongue marks, and not Zoe, Farah, the dog, had little tongue marks and kibble strewn about the bathroom, but the kibble fell in a position that it looked like a puppy picture. So I said, Farah, you're making puppy pictures.
And
you're
you took a picture
puppy
of it.
Pictures. And I took a picture of it.
But it's that writing like a child. So using your imagination and having that enthusiasm,
right,
that a child might have to do to make an idea, to make something up.
Right, and so it's this idea of embodying, the imagination and boundlessness, and sort of casting your, adult way of thinking aside.
Yeah, it's the idea of putting your adult in a box.
Right.
And saying, you're in a timeout, and you can't come out until I finish playing.
I tell you what it makes me think of automatically. It makes me think of Peter Pan.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm talking about the stage play Peter Pan.
Mm-hmm, yes.
And when he didn't want to grow up because he wanted to continue to imagine, wondrous places that he and his band of boys and girls could could go to.
And it's it's that freedom of imagination that enriches stories like How Nicholas Became Santa Claus, your highly rated Eric Hoffer nominated sci-fi fantasy novel, which, by the way, you can pick up at Walmart and Target, and of course you can get it at your website on the author page, because this book is fantastic. And so children are naturally curious. So how does curiosity play a role in the process?
Well, yeah, I think curiosity makes us want to discover things. Why this works, why that doesn't work, why this is this way. And so I remember when having child imagination when I was a kid, I used to ask my mom, what's happening when it's thundering? Well, she didn't tell me about electricity and all of the things that static electricity and the raindrops. So she said that God was working. So in my little 5-year-old brain, I'm seeing the Master of the Universe hammering out people on an anvil with a big hammer like Thor, and they're boxing them up, getting ready to send them down the earth. That was my
I remember Mom tell us when we were children that thunder was God bowling with the angels.
Right.
So I picture these angels in a bowling alley bowling, which I think is just amazing. Or it's God's taking a shower, so he's watering his plants. In your book, How Nicholas Became Santa Claus, you have so many fantastical elements, and not excluding, of course, the idea of a flying wagon, which Nicholas talks about, wanting to be able to have at some point, which we all know.
That's an illusion.
In the classic, case of Santa Claus, this is something that happens. So, but the idea of sort of working that into the story, channeling your child's imagination to influence these elements.
Yeah, I think in this story, of course, it's all about origins, where things have come from. So, there's some mention of certain things that one would expect that Nicholas would be involved in.
Right.
And so, but it's in passing sometimes, but it keeps us in that lane.
Right.
Okay.
But also in more fantastical elements, like, for instance, the light sprites. We've talked about before on these things, these and the color sprites.
Yeah.
And these were also just part of your childish imagination, Sandy.
And yours. You guys, you and your brothers and sister would ask me questions about how did these colors get in the leaves, and
so whether you knew it or not, you were some of that inspiration, all of you.
Right. Well, you're welcome.
And
keeps the mind going.
One of my favorite memories was when you
me, okay,
you
all right,
you were like Zoe's age.
Yes.
And we were outside.
That's like 3.5.
Yeah, 3.5. And we were outside in the front, and we were looking at the lightning bugs playing on tomato leaves. And you asked me why the lightning bugs were out there, and I says, well, God uses them as glitter so he can see if the plants are growing.
Oh, okay, yeah. That's cool. So going back to that childlike curiosity, we talked about your world building, and Nicholas, you have this fantastic, amazing, just living universe, not just world, but universe of Nicholas that you've created, which we see in How Nicholas Became Santa Claus, and we're going to see in your sequels. How does the question of what if come into play in terms of your childhood curiosity, writing like a child and creating a fantasy world and all of these fantastic, things?
It's the permission.
Yeah.
What if gives you the permission to try to change what you standardly known to be the physics of the time.
I agree with that, because I was going to say something similar. It allows you to throw off the shackles of physics, and kind of emerge as a new being, like a butterfly leaving its chrysalis into a different world.
Right.
Where you can imagine without that, without the physics of the real world holding you back.
How do you sort of avoid the rabbit hole of what if? How do you, what if this, what if that, what if that, what if... Well, how do you stop and say, okay, I've got enough wonderment to move forward with my story?
Well,
you have an outline.
You can, you have an outline. And I think you can get stuck in a rabbit hole, and it just goes around and around, and it's not taking you anywhere. You're staying in the same place. So, like she said, like my wife said, you have an outline.
Do you ever think to yourself, "Let's go spelunking. Let's take this rabbit hole and just see how many ideas, concepts, imagine what have you we can come up with"?
Well, no.
No, because it's very tiresome.
Yes, and I think if you do that, you can wind up with no story. You'll have that never-ending story. And that's not what you want.
Not the cult classic favorited.
So,
No.
what?
Never-ending story.
And if I've not mentioned it before, I'll mention it now. That when you write a story, you should know how it begins. You should know what's in the middle, and how it ends. It's you develop some concept of that during the outline. So it would, if without an outline, it would be trying to get to the fountain of youth without a map. You need a map. Okay, and you can deviate from that map ever so slightly, and sometimes even greatly, but ever so slightly, as long as you continue to go in the right direction.
Right.
And use your imagination to do that. But your imagination is very powerful.
And that imagination, as authors, dear readers and listeners, requires some fearlessness. And children are often fearless when it comes to expressing themselves. So how can this fearlessness benefit writers?
Well, you take chances. And you take dares, in the story. It's all written in the outline. You take something daring and do, and then you manifest it in your writing.
So that fearlessness then allows us to take risks with our characters and our plot, and it also allows bold choices that can lead to an unforgettable story. Like how Nicholas became Santa Claus.
What I like to do is I'll write the main idea of the story in my head, and then I'll write 3 different endings, and then see how the what ifs which ending will the what ifs take me to.
And it's funny that you mentioned that. I forgot all about that. But when you're outlining a story, you've done one outline, and it may be in a 90-page outline. Then you might wind up doing another one. That may be another 90-page outline. So sometimes you do that to try to find the best path to take.
So what you're saying is we have a timeline, takes us to 1985.
Yep.
And whatever we do might take us to an alternate 1985, which is almost just like the original 1985 with
something different.
Differences.
Yeah, it's a little like Back to the Future.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, there are various timelines. And so your outline may deviate slightly and is thrust and emphasis on certain characters in each outline that you've done. You'll choose either the best of all of those outlines and see how they fit, or you'll choose the best of outlines and use that particular one.
Now, I've asked this question in some way or another in our previous podcasts, but for our new listeners and readers, I want to sort of ask this question again, since we're talking about plots and fearlessness, and you were mentioning your storylines or timelines, what have you. What comes first, the chicken or the egg? Do you write the beginning or the ending first?
I've heard people say they do it. You need, when you start a story, you have to know where it's going to end. Mm-hmm. I keep saying it, or you're going to get the never-ending story. It's going to go on and on and on and on. Mm-hmm. So you have to know the ending. You want someone to succeed, someone has to fail. There has to be reward. There has to be punishment.
And there has to be unpredictability.
So you have to know what kind of story you're going to write. And you might get to that ending the way you want it. Or as the story begins, as you begin to write, the story begins to take on its own persona and write itself. And you may gravitate to that ending, or it may be totally different.
And sometimes you have to be careful because you may not like the way the story has built your character, right, and you don't like that character and you want to throw it away. And sometimes you do, and sometimes that character builds the entire
and then again, that goes back to what has become almost our mantra of the show. Does it drive the story? And then that's where you decide, okay, do I throw it away and start anew, or do I let this character continue? Do you ever just sort of, as you write, let a character run amok?
Yes.
Well, if it feeds the story, mm-hmm, if it's going to be good for the story, but it's kind of running amok with purpose and intention, mm-hmm, and it's just that you're not writing random things for this person to do. He has to have a solid job,
right?
And what he does may not make sense, but it has to make sense to you. So there has to be order. So there's order and disorder. You can't write something cogent and have no order, because things will be out of place.
Right. And
if you're gonna, every story that's written has to resemble life in some way. Otherwise,
you can't relate.
You can't relate to it. It won't resonate with you. And one of the biggest things that occurs in life is things that go wrong, or things that go unpredictably, or weeks and months that go unpredictably, and then all of a sudden they straighten out.
So before we sort of wrap up today's chit-chat on writing like a child and sort of using these personalities that we have to create these characters, what practical writing tips might you have for our listeners and readers that would influence their childlike creativity? Now, before, you've mentioned keeping a journal, you've mentioned in our previous podcasts brainstorming, and you've mentioned reading children's books. So what other advice might you like to add on to those previous mentioned suggestions?
Pretend.
Mm-hmm.
Pretend.
Mm-hmm. Pretend.
Pretend.
Mm-hmm.
Just for the sake of pretending.
Just for the sake of pretending.
Daryl?
Sure. And just write with vigor and verve and with purpose. And you may, in fact, get the story that you started out to get. Sometimes you get a better story, sometimes.
The phrase "practice makes perfect" applies to every element of writing, every element of proceeding in life.
Listeners and readers, if you would like to see an example of practice makes perfect, in my opinion, I definitely think you should check out How Nicholas Became Santa Claus. And you can do that by visiting our website at troopbooks.com. You can visit our Instagram, our Facebook, our TikTok, our X at troopbooks. If you head to our website, you can hit up our author page where you can pick up a hardcover or a softcover. And I hope to talk to you all. Bring your imaginations with you next time on Conversations with the Authors.